And for you to take an hour out of your busy day to listen to this is impressive. But I'm going to share with you what I think are the two most significant spheres of influence that are swirling about the agency and demanding a lot of time of the agency. I'm going to speak about House Bill 2017, the transportation funding package, and then I'll shift to the management review and tell you where we are on both. So, as you know, the Oregon legislature adjourned business on July 7th, 2017. Over the course of that legislative session, 2,829 bills and resolutions and memorials were introduced. Of that, 881 were passed into law. I'm going to speak about one, House Bill 2017. But before I get to the 2017 conversation, I have to go back to conversations that really transpired in 2015. Because from 2015 into 16, then on into 17, it was an evolution that actually built up to the successful discussion on House Bill 2017. So let's go back to the 2015 legislative session. Another conversation about funding, another conversation about accountability was taking place during the legislative session. And while we ran very fast and hard, there were a host of issues at play beyond transportation. And when all was said and done, we did not cross the tape in terms of securing a transportation funding package in 2015. But there were foundational pieces laid in terms of the needs, in terms of issues surrounding accountability. Those informed a couple other conversations that were fundamental to our success in 2017. The first was a governor's vision panel, originally stood up by Governor Kitzhaber, representative individuals covering the breadth and depth of transportation interests. Some of those folks with a deep knowledge of transportation, some with nothing more than the knowledge that transportation touches the economic and the lives of Oregonians each and every day. So a good group of folks. They actually toured the state. I think they hit, if my memory serves me correct, about 11 communities. Listening to Oregonians, listening to their wants, their beliefs, their values. What did they want to see in their transportation system? What did they want to see in their transportation department? Good, healthy conversations. 3 or 4 themes rose to the top after those conversations. The first being Oregonians shared with this vision panel that we have invested billions of dollars in the current transportation system. So they believe it is incumbent upon this agency and all those folks in transportation to preserve the asset, make sure it does not crumble beneath our feet. So preservation of the transportation asset, our roads, our bridges. Take a look at seismic vulnerabilities. Take a look at culverts, which are kind of ticking time bombs underneath the surface. But when they go, they take out the roadway. That was the number one priority, first and foremost. The second issue was transit. That you must connect Oregonians from point A to point B, and you must give them choices. There are those folks that are either too young, they are either too old, they have some type of disability, or they just choose not to drive a car. They still have a life to live, to be productive Oregonians here. So give those folks choices. So transit. A little bit different conversation in a Portland metro area versus down in southern Oregon or in eastern Oregon, the rural parts of the state. But again, fundamental issue of choice, transportation choice. The third theme that rose to the top was congestion, specifically up in the Portland metro area, on the I-5 and on the 205 corridor. Folks from across the state, again, from Medford to Bend to Ontario, said, listen, whether we're moving forest products from southern Oregon up to the Port of Portland, or we're moving ag products from eastern Oregon to the Port of Portland, our product gets stuck. Can't get it to market because of the congestion in the greater Portland metro area. So this is an economic issue here. And oh, by the way, sometimes we like to bring our families up to the big city. We get stuck. So whether it's freight mobility or personal mobility, the congestion in Portland, 5 and 205, is compromising that for our fellow Oregonians. So you must deal with that. So again, not only a discussion about the good folks who have the opportunity to drive I-5 and 205 every day in the Portland metropolitan area, but those folks moving product and people from all across the agency pointed to congestion. The fourth theme that was expressed was remember the non-highway side of the conversation. Roads and bridges are a priority, there's no question. You still have needs in aviation, in the ports across the state of Oregon, with regard to rail, kind of the Connect Oregon investments that we have made on the non-highway side. So make sure when you engage this conversation, you are engaging the whole of the transportation system. So those were the 3 or 4 themes that really bubbled to the top from that vision panel. As we move into the 16 time frame, there was a significant meeting that took place up in the Portland metro area called by Governor Brown, Senate President Peter Courtney, and House Speaker Tina Kotek. She brought business leaders from across the state. She brought the transportation stakeholders around the table and said, you know, as we look forward to the 2017 legislative session, the priority of the governor, the Senate President, of the House Speaker was going to be transportation. It would be the transportation session coming in at us in 2017. After that meeting, the Senate President and the House Speaker created a joint transportation committee, a 14-member committee, which is a rather large transportation or a policy committee across the street. But equally represented, 7 folks from the Senate, 7 from the House, who spent late spring and all of their summer touring the state of Oregon. Again, listening to Oregonians. And we had a little part of setting up those conversations because it was really broken out into 2 phases. The first thing the members would do is they would go to project sites, projects where we had made investments, showed the benefits of those investments, and then they would tour facilities that were substandard, that were compromising or creating a drag on the economic health of the state because the transportation infrastructure had deficits. And let me give you an example. The very first one we did was up in Woodburn. And you may remember, prior to the investment on that new interchange, there were times that because of activities, whether at the outlet stores or the Tulip Festival or just general activity in that area, there would be a queuing down the ramp onto the I-5 main line. Significant safety issues. And this was reoccurring over and over again. In addition to that, Highway 214 that runs into Woodburn itself was compromised. Needed an investment because it was, again, tamping down the economic and community opportunities within Woodburn. And I would submit to you it may have stretched along 219 as you're heading toward St. Paul as well, but 214 specifically. So we showed them, we told them, we being not only the department, but the business leaders of Woodburn, the local elected officials who actually put $8 million toward that project. So a small town like Woodburn put $8 million of skin in the game. Pretty impressive. They told the story before. Jobs and Transportation Act in 2009 actually sent $43 million toward that $70 million project. So the delta between 70 and 43 were identified with different other revenue streams here. But a $70 million investment that addressed the safety issues, that addressed the congestion issues, and will allow Woodburn to grow. So we showed with investment, benefit accrues on many different levels. And then we spent about 10 minutes going up I-5 north to the Donald Aurora exit. And if you know Donald Aurora, there's a big truck stop there, a lot of truck freight activity that takes place there. Showed them the substandard interchange there. Similar queuing situation, playing itself out back onto the main line. Safety issues playing itself out over and over again. And we said with an investment here, you will see the same benefit we saw down in Woodburn. We had a part of that. We helped construct that to some extent with the help of a lot of other people. But it was trying to tell the story of with investment comes great benefit, not only for the transportation system in strengthening that system, but enhancing the economic health of the state of Oregon. In addition to that, they would come back from those types of tours and they'd spend the next 2 hours listening to, again, Oregonians in a public hearing format. So they did this across the state. As I said, they spent their late spring and all of their summer doing this, traveling. And a funny thing happened. The same themes that rose to the top from that governor's vision panel rose to the top with his joint committee circuit ride. The issues of, first and foremost, you preserve the transportation asset that we've invested in as Oregonians. Second, give us transportation choice. Invest in transit across the state of Oregon. Understanding, again, it may be different in the urban parts of the state versus the rural parts of the state, but make that investment. Deal with that congestion, killing us across the state. And then finally, again, be comprehensive. Make sure you take both investments on the highway side and the non-highway side. So there was an affirmation from the conversations, from business leaders, transportation stakeholders, to the legislators, the policy body that would make up the folks who crafted the transportation bill in 2017. Come February of 2017, when the legislative session started, immediately the 14-member committee broke out into 4 and then eventually 5 work groups. And as a matter of fact, they broke out into the areas, those themes. So they broke out into a preservation work group, a congestion work group, a transit work group, and then a multimodal work group. And then a little later on, they broke out into another accountability work group. So there were 5 work groups led by legislators. Everybody was invited to come around the table and start to do the spade work that would eventually become the framework for House Bill 2017. During the course of the legislative session, that's exactly what they did. They dove deeper into these issues. They eventually brought these 5 conversations into one before the whole of the committee as we were moving through the June time frame. What they placed on the table initially was a transportation funding package of about $8 billion, comprehensive in nature. As they did that, as they worked those discussions, there was a concern or an anxiety that started to build, saying $8 billion is just too heavy a lift to get off the ground. So a political overlay was done, compromise was made, a refinement down from $8 billion to $5.3 billion. And that is the package that was passed when all was said and done. We should be very happy. The fingerprints of the Oregon Department of Transportation help inform and shape that $5.3 billion package. And we weren't alone, but we were a force and a voice that showed up each and every time one of those work groups met, each and every time the 14-member joint committee met as a whole. We were there sharing our insights to inform the crafting of that policy document. We should be very proud because what we have accomplished, what the good folks across the street accomplished, was something that was historic, it was comprehensive, and it was innovative in its approach. Now, why do I say that? If you unpack this thing, let's just look at the notion of why it's historic. You just need to look at the size. For those of you that remember back in the 2001-2003 time frame, there was an investment known as OTIA, the Transportation Investment Act. And if you were to look at that act over the life of the bill, what you saw was that new investment was about $100 million of new money each year. OTIA. Let's jump ahead to 2009, the Jobs and Transportation Act. The new money secured from that act was about $270 million of new money on an annual basis. If you look now at House Bill 2017, $500 million of new money on an annual basis has been secured by that action. So you can see from a sheer size, we are now at the high water mark of transportation investment here in the state of Oregon. Comprehensive. Again, as I said, it touches all modes of transportation. And for all intents and purposes, there are obligations and responsibilities across all the portfolios of the Oregon Department of Transportation. And it ripples beyond the Oregon Department of Transportation into local government, into some of our sister agencies, and I'll touch upon that a little bit later. And remember, going back to the OTIA and the Jobs and Transportation Act, if you looked at those investments, they were really highway-centric. Again, the comprehensive nature, the size of 2017 takes us to that multimodal investment. Now, how'd they do it? Well, they did it through innovation, and they did it through bold leadership. OTIA and JTA were funded, for all intents and purposes, with increases of the gas tax and the registration and title fees that work through the DMV and the professionals there. Traditional ways of doing business. In order to be of the size and the comprehensive nature, the highway, non-highway investment, new funding streams were identified to address the concerns related to transit. A statewide payroll tax of 0.1% was developed and implemented. Again, that will bring in a little over $100 million across the state of Oregon to enhance and strengthen the transit across the state, to better connect and grow networks to ensure that getting from point A to point B to point C is as seamless as possible. Making sure that we're addressing low-income communities as well. Making sure that there's not only personal mobility, but I believe if you invest in transit, that's an investment in upward mobility, the ability to get folks to jobs here. So an innovative approach there, a bold approach to create a new tax. The privilege tax on the sale of new vehicles. Again, that allows money to flow to the multimodal account, the Connect Oregon type investment. Now, I will tell you that that will probably be challenged because there are some folks who believe that a tax on a new vehicle, whatever money that is generated, should be directed to the Highway Trust Fund. Well, that was a conversation that was front and center during the legislature, so the legislator said, fine. Our intent has it going to the non-highway side. But a legitimate question has been asked. There are conflicting opinions from a legal perspective. So they inserted language that has this discussion going directly to the Oregon Supreme Court for a decision, to make a determination whether the money that comes from that new privilege tax either goes to the highway or the non-highway side. One of the major themes during the discussion is users should pay. If you use the system, you should pay for the system, right? Skin in the game was a term bantied about often, and you find that playing itself out now with a $15 flat fee on bicycles. Bicycles that cost over $200 or have a wheelbase of over 26 inches, so trying to avoid the little kids' bikes. But again, those folks that use the system should pay for the system. Now, it doesn't generate a whole lot of money, but the money it does generate goes directly to bike pedestrian facilities here. And it is a symbolic gesture that scratches the itch that there has to be skin in the game by all users here. Opportunity to deal with congestion up in the Portland metro area, that 5205 conversation. They've opened up an opportunity for this department to explore value pricing, or maybe another term, congestion pricing, which is really a subset of tolling when you step back and look at it. But they said, are there viable opportunities for congestion pricing on the 5, on 205, to try to tamp down some of the congestion, to make sure people are driving at the appropriate time, or maybe they shift because of the price signals. With this investment in transit, maybe they shift now to that mode, which opens up a little capacity on both those corridors here. So again, very difficult discussion because you go into a congestion pricing or a tolling conversation with about 70% of the folks saying, no way, no how. We haven't articulated the benefit that would come with such an investment, and that will come, and we have a fairly robust discussion ahead of us via a policy advisory group that our Transportation Commission has engaged to help inform this discussion and to determine whether we have a viable pathway on those two corridors that we can take to the Federal Highway Administration saying we want to move forward and send some price signals on those corridors. The final thing they embedded in this document was jurisdictional transfers. Now, over time, a state highway, its characteristic may evolve to one that is no longer of state interest, but it becomes a local road. And who should own that? One would argue should be the locals, if that's the characteristics and attribute of that roadway now, over time. Now, this is not a new concept. We've actually been successful over time in certain places of transferring jurisdictions when the characteristics of the roadways change. But we usually stumble because we can't make the math work, right? No one wants to accept a liability. They want a piece of roadway brought up to a certain standard before they take it up. So what happened here, save one transfer, was skin in the game put in there. There was money attached to jurisdictional transfers. So up in the Portland East Multnomah County area, Powell Boulevard, $100 million will be invested in the stretch of highway, which is now a state highway, that runs from the 205 corridor to the Gresham city limits. Once that $100 million, I think it's 110 to be very honest, once that is invested in that piece of roadway, we now have a new, safer, more efficient piece of roadway there. We will transfer that to the city of Portland. Similar situations will play themselves out in the Lane County area. Activities with Lane County, with the city of Springfield, with the city of Eugene, where we will transfer some of our roadways to them. They will transfer some of the roadways back to us, exchange of money to make sure that we're whole in terms of that activity. There is one Cornelius Pass Road where no money came to it. Right now, Cornelius Pass Road is owned by Washington County and Multnomah County. It really is a route that a lot of commuters from Columbia County take to go to work in Washington County. It also is a route that carries some hazmat trucks. 26 Vista Ridge Tunnel, you can't take hazmat to it. So what we do is we direct people down 217 back onto I-5, and then they have to come back up and eventually get to Highway 30. So rather than doing that, they cut across Cornelius Pass Road. The Multnomah County portion of that section really is not up to speed and up to a standard where it is safe and efficient to move that. So there is, again, a characteristic changing in terms of the type of traffic that uses Cornelius Pass Road. So that'll come to us over time. Most of the activities will be clothed in safety-type investments as I see it going forward. The fifth area of conversation was accountability. And again, you can go back to the 2015 legislative session where that began, but literally you can go back to the Jobs and Transportation Act or the OTIA Act, because any time the legislature intends to make an investment in transportation, they want to make sure that those receiving the investment are prepared to deliver it, whether it is the Oregon Department of Transportation or whether it's our local government partner. And if you look very closely and listened very closely to the accountability conversation, it was that plus a very simple notion, the notion of stewardship, which I think as a public servant is our highest calling. We are stewards of our fellow Oregonians' money. So stewardship, as I defined it, really is an ethic that embodies the responsible planning, prioritization, and then the management of resources here. And if you look at the accountability conversation that played itself out, and it is embedded in the first 25 sections of of House Bill 2017. It really speaks to the stewardship responsibility. In addition to that, it speaks to clarity of roles and responsibilities. So as you walk through those first 25 sections, what you will see is a better clarity with regard to the OTC's alignment with the governor's office, with this agency, and with the legislature. There are certain authorities now given to the OTC that increases the oversight of the policy board to the agency. There are efforts with regard to cost-benefit analysis on projects that are of $15 million and above, mostly in the modernization or the capacity building side of this. There's an enhanced role for the Commission in the use of our audit professionals here. To date, while we touch base with the Commission, probably one commissioner who sits on our audit committee, we now have an opportunity for Ms. Hartinger and her professionals to engage the Commission as a whole, where they come and say, you know, Marlene, we think there's some risk in this area. You should pursue it. So there's a more direct relationship with the auditors than there have been in the past. It makes a whole lot of sense. It's a very valuable tool for this agency to ensure our businesses and our business functions are operating at an optimum level, so to speak. There's an issue about communication as well, and this ripples not only into the House bill, but also to the management review. How we communicate. What's the transportation narrative? How can we show that those investments are playing themselves out? Are we delivering those projects on time and on budget? What are we trying to solve with this investment? What's the problem? What's the remedy? And what's the benefit? We'll have an interactive website that helps communicate that. A uniformity in which we communicate, not only as a department, but also cities and counties, where we use the same language. Right now, we're just a little bit different in the way we define certain terms, the health of the condition. We're going to sync that up. Again, transparency in the way we tell the transportation story to the folks that are footing the bill. All those played themselves out in the accountability protocol. So when all was said and done, there's the framework. There's the success of House Bill 2017. Let me tell you where we are right now. Embedded in those documents, as I said before, are significant responsibilities and obligations specific to this agency, specific to our Transportation Commission. But again, the sheer size of this bill spills out into other state agencies. The Department of Revenue, who has to collect these bills, these new programs in terms of the new taxes, whether it be the privilege tax or the privilege, oh, geez, I forgot which one it is. Oh, the payroll tax, transit, sure. Those are new. So there are constructs and structures that need to be dealt with here. Long-term planning. One of the challenges that we have is not only for the Department of Transportation, but for the transportation system as a whole, so we need to bring in our partners at the Department of Aviation. Bring in Business Oregon, because they house the marine, the ports activity. Look at the Marine Board. Some of those long-term plans need to better integrate, so we have that opportunity. DEQ, state parks, the Travel Information Council, the rest area conversation we have with those good folks, all those folks now have to be brought into the mix because they have obligations and responsibilities. And some carry financial implications, that if you don't report something, if you don't deliver something, there are financial implications. The other partner, since half of the gas tax and fees go to cities and counties, they are another partner that has significant obligations and responsibilities, as I said. We have new programs, which means we need to create new rules so people understand the pathways, the rules of the game, so to speak. So whether it's the new Connect Oregon way of doing business, where we now have 4 projects that have been earmarked versus the comprehensive bubbling up process that we've had in the past, we're going to have to approach Connect Oregon a little bit differently. So we take care of those 4 projects, 2 significant transload facilities, one out in eastern Oregon, one in the Mid-Willamette Valley, opportunities there before we get back to a competitive process here. Safe routes to school. investments from safety, the Safe Routes to School, or the ARTS program, which is the All Roads Transportation Safety Investment, which is a jurisdictionally blind investment in safety, ensuring that those areas that are of greatest risk receive the money, no matter what the jurisdiction, perspective, or color is. New advisory committees. I spoke to the advisory committee that we'll have with regard to congestion pricing. We have similar discussions with Safe Routes to School. We have a new committee that will stand up that will focus on efficiency and innovation and optimization, the Continuous Improvement Committee that will report directly to the Oregon Transportation Commission. All these need new constructs, ways of doing business, the bylaws, the processes and protocols. We're working on that. So we're engaged in ensuring everyone is doing the appropriate level of spade work to meet, again, their obligations, their responsibilities. This narrative continues to play itself out because we have a significant conversation that will be engaged in February of 2018, the next time the legislature truly comes back into session for that 35-day short session. As we move to the end of session, as we had the construct of the bill, there was a concern about the resourcing or the fiscal discussion associated with it. And there was a concern if we had the full fiscal conversation, we would lay on top of a $5.3 billion investment a pretty significant fiscal ask. The resources needed to truly animate House Bill 2017. There was a concern if we did that this balloon would not get off the ground. Fine, we accepted that. Had a conversation saying, if we look at the first 6 months of obligation, because if you, from the July time frame to 6 months, puts you right on the doorstep of February of 2018. So if we look at that time frame and we identify the resources that we need to start to implement and animate the activities embedded in 2017 in that window, let us put that on the table as a fiscal light discussion with the notion that we would come back in February of 18 and have the full resourcing discussion. And that was agreed to. So we did that and the bill moved forward. In addition to that, you have a bill of about 176 sections. And depending on how you print it, it's well over 300 pages. At the pace we were moving, sometimes you don't dot all the I's or cross the T's. Sometimes you don't get the sequencing of dates right. Sometimes you don't get percentages that would, if you tweak this, may benefit the condition of the system better. Technical corrections. These aren't fatal flaws to the bill, but there are technical corrections. So as we move this conversation, meeting all our obligations, come February of 2018, we will bring forth the full fiscal discussion that says in order for us to be successful in animating each and every part of House Bill 2017, these are the skill sets and the resources that we need. And in addition to that, there are some technical corrections that we think can make what is a historic bill just that much better if we make some tweaks here. And we'll have that conversation with the Legislative Assembly here. We're prepared for that. We'll probably do a little touch and go in November. We have a 3-day session. They come in. We'll start having the discussions about what does that construct look like as we move to the February 2018 time frame. So that pretty much is the 2017 story. Very successful. We should be very proud of what we've accomplished here. I'm going to pivot now to the management review. And much like the funding discussion, you can really go back to 2015 because some of the elements of a management review were embedded in those conversations. Again, stewardship type issues. 2015 leads into 2016. There was a call by the governor to the commission saying, why don't you engage and ensure that this agency is ready to take on an investment. So why don't you engage in a management assessment of the Oregon Department of Transportation. That eventually morphed into the Department of Administrative Services hiring a contractor, McKinsey & Company, to come in and take a look at the Oregon Department of Transportation. McKinsey and Company, probably a world-renowned organization, great credibility. They work in both the public and the private spheres. A good investment to take a look of who we are as an organization. And you may remember conversations with this group because you were part of it. An organizational health survey was sent out to all employees of the Oregon Department of Transportation, asking about your job. What do you think of it? Asking about the management of the agency. What do you think about it? Asking about the transportation system as a whole. What do you think about it? What's good? What's bad? What can be better? Comprehensive review. 64% of ODOT employees sent back the survey, sharing their thoughts, their compliments, their concerns, their critiques of who we are as an organization. And that was very impressive. McKinsey said that's an impressive number of folks. So your fingerprints are on informing, right from the get-go, this management assessment here. What came back from the McKinsey report was you are a high-performing organization. There's no question about that. But like any organization, you do some things well, and there are some things that you can improve on. And oh, by the way, when you hold the Oregon Department of Transportation up against our public sector partners, our fellow DOTs across the nation, we are above average. When you hold us up against the best in class in the private sector, we're below average. So to that point, affirming some of the things we do very well, identifying some pathways for opportunities to move forward. Taking all that information, McKinsey, working with the Department of Administrative Services, came up with 8 recommendations. The first being governance, better alignment. You've heard this before. Better alignment between the governor's office, between the Oregon Transportation Commission, between the legislature, and between the Oregon Department of Transportation. Would submit to you a lot of that was addressed in House Bill 2017. Our job now is to operationalize it, the language embedded in those first 25 sections. So we're moving on that front. The second recommendation that came forth dealt with the creation of a strategic business plan. One of the observations McKinsey made is we are an organization that tries to be all things to all people. And if you had all the resource that you needed, that wouldn't be a bad thing. But Lord knows we don't have all the resource that we need. The needs far outstrip the revenues, even with this significant infusion with House Bill 2017. So we're going to have to be a little more focused, identify what our priorities are, ensure that those priorities sync up with the performance measures that we have, to make sure where there is a flow, there is a commitment, and you're not taking your resource and spreading it too thin, which in a way makes it challenging for folks to understand truly what their job is and how it supports the mission of the agency. And I'm going to come back to that because that is a key point. And I'll speak a little more to the strategic business plan here in a moment. There were certain areas, process, protocols that they said, hey, you can optimize the way you do business in the area of procurement, in the area of fleet, in the area of facilities. Take a look at this. Look for opportunities to remove redundancies, to simplify, to optimize your activity in those areas. Communication. As a matter of fact, specific to communication, they said, you know, this is an agency almost without peer in terms of us engaging outreach, seeking advice and input across the board on any of the transportation interests or activities across this state. We do a great job. Cited the area commissions on transportation as something that truly has improved and advanced the state of conversation specific to transportation in Oregon. But they said once you receive that input and you kind of put it into the machine of discussion, deliberation, and decision making, it gets a little opaque because eventually you'll spit out a decision. What folks would like to know, with that input that we did give you, how did it inform the overall conversation rather than just coming back to us with a decision or a direction? Help us understand how the input informed those discussions and eventually the direction. So open up the black box, so to speak. I said you have a constitutional obligation to ensure that the monies that are arrived at from the gas tax as well as the DMV fees, that they are dedicated to the roadway. That's the constitutional language, pretty specific. Are you staying within your lane? That was a question that was called back in 2015. It just carried over into this assessment. So they said, why don't you have an audit done just to make sure you're staying within your lane? So that's fine. Stewardship issue again. Bring it on. And then finally, they say in all these areas, you are going to receive these recommendations, these findings, and you're going to commit to do A, B, and C, D, and so on. As we move out to the 2020 timeframe, might it be prudent that you come back and reflect on it? Bring another set of eyes, an audit, a review, to ensure that you did A, B, C, and D, and so on and so forth. Okay? Promises made, promises kept. It's who we are as an organization. I have no problem with that. So the McKinsey report offers what I think is a great opportunity and became a foundation, a jump-off point for now the operationalization of those activities. But more importantly, it allows us and motivates us, I think, to be best in class, no matter if we're held up to the public sector or the private sector. That really is the motivation, my takeaway from that assessment. So with that, we actually brought in another consultant, Pivotal Resources, and says, help us guide our way through the recommendations with a focus on the strategic business plan. And we said, listen, this is not only a charge that will be taken up by the Department of Transportation, it'll be taken up by the Oregon Transportation Commission because this is a joint venture. Again, we're in this together in terms of refinement of our priorities, a reflection on our mission, on our vision, on our goals, our values here. So Pivotal has come on board. They have been engaged. They have done some baseline type of assessments. Their observations really fell within 3 areas after they did their scrutinies. They looked at the governance and the priority issues, and they made an interesting observation that we are an organization of teams, of different forums. They proliferate, and they're sure good stuff is happening, but they're not sure that those discussions that are taking place truly are playing themselves out at the enterprise level of the Oregon Department of Transportation. What they say is there's really no central direction setting forum here. So they said this agency might want to step back with the commission and look at some of the constructs that we have in terms of all the meetings and structures we have that inform the various and the many aspects of transportation. And then make sure you have at least a decision-making forum that ensures that those issues ripple throughout and down into the organization as a whole. They spoke to the culture, the engagement disposition of the agency. And their observations, I think, were positive. And in light, they said, you are an organization that gets things done. You understand the tactical approach to getting things done. You want to continue to promote that part of your culture. But that said, you haven't balanced it with a culture that understands the big picture. So it really becomes tactics versus strategic type of approach. So they said, you need to step back and ensure that the agency as a whole has a clear understanding of the big picture. What are those priorities? What are those objectives that you're trying to get to? What are your efforts to ensure that the resource of the agency is directed in the right place? Be more strategic. And then in turn, the disposition you have as an agency to get things done, you will engage the tactics that now align with that strategic approach. Right now, we're a little off. We're a little dispersed, a little misaligned. on that front. Overall, in terms of engagement, they said, hey, in our conversations with the host of individuals in this department, while there is anxiety, while there are a lot of questions in terms of can the culture of the agency change from that tactical to the more strategic, from an agency that constantly says yes, we never seem to say no, to an agency that might not say no, although no is the right answer sometimes, but an agency that says not yet. And what I mean by that is if we say yes, then we're saying yes to the priorities and the initiatives we want to move right now. If an initiative comes at us, and a lot of them come from within the agency, but you know as well as I, a lot of them come from external to the agency. A lot of those have great merit and will, again, advance the practice of transportation in Oregon. But if we're going to be focused on our initiatives, better using our resources, both financial and human, sometimes you have to say not yet and create the sequencing or the queuing of effort. They said, you need to become that agency. And a lot of people raise their hands saying, I'm not sure we can do that. But overall, very positive. I think people have read the McKinsey report. I think they have watched the conversation at the legislature, and they see the work done by Pivotal Resources now, saying, you know what, we have a great opportunity to write the next chapter of who we are, not only now to take on the challenges, but who we are as a DOT as we look to the future. The final area that they said we need to look into is the areas of business activity, transactions, opportunities, issues, resourcing type issues. Again, are you resourced right to deliver the needs of today, but maybe more importantly, as you look to the future, do you have the right skill sets to take on the challenges? Because the reality is culture moves in a linear fashion. Technology and advancement, at least as we're seeing today, is coming at us in an exponential fashion or form here. So how do we make sure we're pacing that appropriately? It's the talent development. Again, are we preparing our people that we have now to engage issues into the future? More importantly, as we're trying to attract young, bright folks into this organization, are we identifying the right skill sets that we want to move us forward here? And then they said, listen, you're an agency of innovation. You should be very proud of that. You look at this agency and there are a lot of firsts associated not only with the state of Oregon, but also with the Oregon Department of Transportation. Don't lose that. Don't lose that. That is part of who you need to be. Taking all this information, back in September, I called a leadership team together. And for all intents and purposes, it is the division administrators. I added a couple more folks that rounded out the body there. But I said, I want you to take all this information and I want you to identify what we believe are the core areas we need to focus on. That is your charge. And after that, I'm going to bring other folks to do a little bit deeper dive. And that's exactly what happened. So the leadership team went to work. They identified 4 core issues, and none of this should surprise you because it played itself out in House Bill 2017, and it played itself out over the evolution of this management review or assessment. First and foremost, first core area, governance and accountability. Do a deeper dive into that. Let's be clear. Where there's ambiguity, we will work to ensure there's clarity. Second area, workforce. Again, what we need now, what we need as we move to the future. The third area, technology and data. How do we position ourselves to take on, again, the exponential pace of technology and how it ripples into this agency? And then how do we take data? Because Lord knows we have all kinds of data. But how do you take that and transform it into knowledge and intellect that, again, advances the activities within this agency? And then finally, always comes down to resourcing, strategic investment. Make sure you are targeting your priorities, given that you have finite resources to do such a thing. Earlier this month, took those 4 core issues, created working groups, as we call them. And what I did was I went down and across the organization to identify individuals to do this deeper dive. This may sound pejorative, it's not meant to be, but I just didn't want the usual suspects working on this. I needed new perspectives, new lens, new voices informing this discussion. Because when all is said and done, if this agency is going to change, it's not going to be because a transportation commission says so, or it's not going to be because you have a director of the agency saying so. It's going to be because the agency and the individuals who make up that agency want to see the change. I am of the opinion that whatever the endeavor is, you will be successful or you will fail because of the individuals you bring to the table. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. So a new group of folks informing those 4 core areas. And their work, I believe, will certainly yield what will be the initial set of priorities and the initial framework for the strategic business plan. Now, as we look at a strategic business plan, it really is a 5-year document. It's a living document, and you know it's going to look a little bit different in year 1 than it looks in year 3 and then year 5, and who knows where it goes after that. But it starts us down a pathway that, again, will allow us to reflect on our mission, the values of this organization, the vision. We don't have a vision. We kind of jump from mission to values, and that's fine. We can reflect on that. It will guide how we operate as an organization, where we focus our resource, how we embed the notion of continuous improvement in the individual and then in turn in the agency as a whole. So we will set priorities. We will manage those priorities. We will better align those priorities with our performance measures. And then we will deliver the outcomes which support the mission of the agency. That really, at its core, is what this vehicle known as the strategic business plan will do here. I'm going to use an analogy. Now, some of you aren't old enough to go back this far, but if you can go back to the 50s and then the 60s, NASA was a front and center organization at this nation. And if you remember back in the 50s, NASA's job and charge was to put a man in space. And then in the 60s, as we rolled forward with the Apollo program, to put a man on the moon. And they were men at the time, but if you've watched Hidden Figures, you know there were some very important women ensuring that that happened as well. But if you were to ask the question of John Glenn, of Neil Armstrong, of all those folks with white short-sleeve shirts with black ties, with vests on, sitting around those tables, watching the launch. Or maybe more important, if you were to ask a man or a woman who may have been cleaning the hallways up at NASA, if you asked them what their job was, they would reply with the following answer. My job is to put a man in space. My job is to put a man on the moon. There was a clarity of purpose for what they did as an individual to how that accomplished the mission of the agency. I think that is a pathway for the Oregon Department of Transportation. I want to make sure that every person that wears the ODOT uniform understands how their job, that individual understands what they do, how that supports the mission of their branch or their unit, which in turn supports the mission, the mandates of their division, which in turn supports the mission of the agency. Clarity of purpose. I wouldn't ask it if I didn't think we didn't have the capacity to do that. But I look at this room, and I've had the privilege of having this conversation with many folks. And I know the capacity to deal with that challenge resides in this room. And thus we're going to do that. And we can go to school on NASA. So we'll craft this strategic business plan. I want to take full advantage of this, the assessment, the opportunities embedded in House Bill 2017. I want us to aspire to be best in class. I want the individuals to be the best that they can be. I want this agency to be the best it can be, because I think that is the best gift this generation can do for the next. So, with that, I'm going to ask if you have any questions, and I'm more than happy to take any questions on these two issues or any other issues you may have. And while you're thinking of those questions, if you're not comfortable raising your hand in a big room like this, I understand that. But you know my email address. Feel free to give me an email. Or you may see me walking the hallways, just buttonhole me saying, hey, Garrett, you know, when you spoke to us on the 26th, you said this. What do you really mean? Or there's a global website that really speaks to the strategic business plan, but you plant a question in there, it will be answered. I think that site is sbp at odot.state.or.us. So you have those opportunities. So now I'm going to stand down, quit talking at you, and I just want to talk with you. So with that, it's Ridenour.
We have some questions from Slido, and the most popular question so far asks you, Director Garrett, you talk about being bold with the strategic business plan. What is your vision on how that might apply to workforce recruiting, performance excellence, and capacity issues?
I think a couple things. I'm of the opinion that each and every one of us sitting here, no matter what chair you sit in across the organization, you can be bold. You can be a leader. Now, why do I say that? Because who best to understand the needs of the organization in terms of skill sets than the practitioners? Inform that conversation. Don't be shy, because it's playing itself out on kind of both ends of a continuum. We have folks who have made investments in this organization over the past 20, 25, 30 years, and they're moving toward the end of their careers. They're eligible for retirement. The first thing we need to do is make sure they don't walk out the door with that wisdom. How do you make sure that wisdom stays with the folks who are here at the organization? Resource, making sure we take that and inform it. Going to the front of the continuum. Biggest question I have, and this is where we need to be bold and fearless, is we've got to change the notion that public service is no longer a noble cause, that it's a toxic environment. Who would want to come to work for public service where all you do is get beat up, or your benefit package is tinkered with over and over again? Not that that's not a legitimate conversation. There is a remedy that needs to take place there. But the environment is not healthy. I think we need to be bold up front, because we need to attract young, bright kids, whether they're engineers coming out of the university or they're electricians coming out of vocational training areas, or folks just coming out of high school. There is a place at the Oregon Department of Transportation for all those folks, all the skill sets that they have, the diversity of thought and experience, of complexion, of composition, to come to this agency and make us better. That's where we need to be bold. And we have to have the courage to maintain that over the short and long term. As we said, it's been said many times too, that these initiatives are great and fine. Culture will eat it for lunch if we don't continue as a whole to lean into it, which means all of us, as I said before. Just because you have an agency director that says this or a commission that says this, that's fine. But those folks come and go. Who stays? So how do we make sure we have the recruitment and the retention, and we celebrate the retirement of those who've invested, but then suck every bit of knowledge that they have back into this organization? That's what I mean, and that's what I think we need to do in order to be bold. Don't be shy. Sir.
Wait for the microphone.
Oh.
Good morning, Director Garrett.
Good morning.
With the additional, investment in transportation and the new works coming down, and hopefully in the next short session we're successful with the full resourcing, is ODOT has a strategic plan for housing these new positions in our current ODOT infrastructure, or is ODOT going to plan new infrastructure? Also, in our current environment, a lot of our experienced personnel is coming up for retirement.
Yep.
It's coming up for retirement. And how are we going to keep that experience in-house when a lot of our complex projects are being resourced out? to the private sector? And then furthermore, how are we going to attract new engineers coming into ODOT when, like you said, PERS is always on the rope every legislation session. We don't know what's going to happen to it. Salaries are not as attractive as other agencies. And, you know, like I said, the projects, the most interesting projects, are not going to be designed in-house.
There's a whole lot of questions there, and I want to do my very best, and correct me if I don't touch them all. I think the previous answer addresses some of that. What we need to make sure is we have the resourcing conversation, is that we have fine-tooth combed the skill sets that we need. And so we're surgical in terms of this is exactly what we need and where they need to go within the agency. Now, with regard to where we house them, we might be a little more cozier in terms, but that's a conversation that'll play itself out, I think, as we optimize our facility. Right? So you see how that everything touches everything when all is said and done. So as we look at the way we use our assets, our facility assets, might we reposition that? Are we building new buildings? I haven't had that conversation. I'm not even thinking about that. Okay. To the issue of the core competencies, I think that's the outsourcing. There is a reality that's at play here. I will ask for what I need. There's a political overlay that will come onto it, and I will get what is politically doable. So the charge in with that equation now is for me to say, how do I position the delivery of this package? Because again, I'm at a high watermark in terms of volumes. So we have made a decision that we're going to outsource more. Turn it on its head. This is not going to be new to us. You go back to the OTIA investment, we did the same thing. We kind of are an agency that has about a 70-30 split in terms of in-house versus outsourcing activities. Big investment comes, we flip it on its head because we're not going to be given all the FTE that we need. So you're going to see this play itself out with regard to the delivery of House Bill 2017. So I see it probably about a 70-30 split, may even inch up a little bit more, because I'm going to be successful in delivering it, because success breeds success. What's incumbent upon us, me, Paul Mather, you sitting in this room, is helping us identify the core competencies that we need as we move from that 30-70 to 70-30 split, okay? There are skill sets that are needed, right? You just can't say, well, now you just go manage a consultant here. Well, if I haven't trained you, shame on me. That means I have not positioned this agency for success here. So I think the core competency conversation of truly what we need in terms of resourcing will be reflected in our discussion come February in dealing with the composition and the shifts of the in-house versus the outsourcing type thing. I think that touches just about everything. Did I miss anything big?
Attracting younger engineers into the state and to stay with the state. I mean, recently, if PERS was going to be affected this last session, it didn't make any financial sense to stay with this as a public, a professional in the public sector.
I think first and foremost, we got to retain the smart people we have, right? Which means we got to give them interesting things to do. Which means we got to reflect on the technology and the infrastructure that we use, the tools that we have. And it's going to be difficult because I'll tell you, our technology always lags. And until we can get to a point where our technology is close, just close to where the private sector is, we're going to be challenged on that front. So how do you compensate for that? Well, you tell those young kids coming out of school, hey, come to us, I can put you to work on things, innovative approaches right now. Whereas you go to the private sector, I'm going to bet you dollars to donut, you won't be able to do what I'm going to let you do probably 5 years out, even if you're one of the best and the brightest. It's just the way they do things. Because I'm probably only going to get them for about 5 years. It's a generational thing. This is another reality of who we are as society. I don't know how many folks are going to come to an organization and spend 25, 30 years anymore. That gentleman is outstanding. So if I do get them, and I can hold them for 5 years, I want to squeeze every ounce of creativity and innovation, and I want that product put on the ground. It also means we have to move from an agency that is risk averse to one that is willing to manage risk. And that's dangerous in the public sector because you know every time we stumble, we're above the fold in the newspapers. Okay? It's another skill set in terms of the training we need to give our managers as well here. And it certainly is a significant conversation with our partners over at the Department of Justice who want to keep us in a risk-averse environment. Well, we don't live in a risk-averse environment. We've got to change our disposition to be a risk manager. I think those are the variables at play, and we'll see if when we plug all that into a formula, what spits out in terms of the quality and the caliber of individual who put on the ODOT uniform. Thank you for your question.
Good morning, Director.
Good morning.
Has there been conversations about whether or not our financial and IT resources are sufficient to handle this increased business? Because, as you know, our teams is pretty outdated, and I don't know if it's going to be able to handle everything that we want to do over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, there have been those conversations. Could we be better positioned? Yes. Will we make it work? Yes. Those have been the conversations. It's going to be a stress. The reality in the IT world, it's really just symbolic of where we are as an agency. We're going to have to refine our priorities. We can't do all things for all people here. This is, again, how are you strategic with your resource here? Now, I will tell you, we're having that conversation with the agency, but there's also a conversation that has been playing itself out over the last several years at the enterprise of state government. I think you have seen now the creation of the State Chief Information Officer in a new way of doing business, bringing discipline to that position, which ensures there is somewhat of an understanding of how the state of Oregon invests in information technology. Prior to this discipline, you had a state that was really just open field running in the IT world. State agencies would just do what they want. Now, I'm sure a lot of good stuff got done, but there was a significant stumble with a health-related technology that has kind of cast a pall, has created a deficit of confidence with the legislatures in terms of IT. Well, there's a discipline that has been applied in terms of how and what the state promotes as IT priorities. We're going to have to do the same thing. We try to be all things to all people at ODOT. Say yes to everybody. We're going to have to say yes to some, not yet to others, and no to some as well. So those are the conversations that are playing themselves out in the IT world. We can be better. There's going to be a lag. We're blessed with good folks. Mr. Danka and his professionals up there understand. But to be honest with you, I think the majority of their time spent just maintaining what we got, preserving that asset, right? You can see the conversations plays itself out, whether it's road infrastructure or IT infrastructure. The challenge is real. But we'll continue to lean into it, and we'll be surgical with our investments to better position us. And you can see that. Our friends at DMV, the Service Transportation Program, again, a significant investment over the course of about a decade that will change the business tool, the computer, that legacy system, which will change the business practice of the agency. I think that's a model that this agency needs to look at. Tom McClellan and his folks have done an outstanding job of not only preparing the technology side, but the change management, the people side. And it gets to the earlier conversation. How do you prepare people to change? Culture, work settings, skill sets. You got to make the investment in that change management discipline as you do the infrastructure side of it. So I think there are things going on at the enterprise level within this agency that, again, will sharpen our focus. But to the earlier question, we're going to have to be bold and make decisions. Be intentional where we go as an organization with our resources here, and it really applies in the IT world as well. We'll continue to play catch-up is probably a fair answer. but at least we're in the game running.
We have time for one more question, and then there are a lot of good questions on Slido, and I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of good questions, and we'll address those in future Inside ODOT columns and interviews with Matt and in the strategic business plan website, etc. So here you go. You get the last word.
So you spoke to the, improvement of the technology, the infrastructure, things of that nature, and so my question is really, I find that the current new kind of movement to the state CIO office is a reactionary thing to something that the state has always done, which is really not have enough resources internally to do what they need to do. They outsource it to something that feels safe and comfortable and end up with what they got, which was a mess.
Yep.
Because they're not being innovative, they're not moving forward. We have a lot of legacy systems and a lot of legacy processes because it's been the way we've always done it, not taking the initiative and time to look at something and say, do we really need to still do it this way? You've got connected vehicles, self-driving cars. There's a lot of technologies that are coming down the pipe that are completely different than what ODOT's ever dealt with. As somebody who works on those kind of things, my question is, what are we doing to address all that technical debt, which is those legacy systems, the processes that are no longer efficient, and even the systems we've built that are more modernized, but still have kind of been kludged together as we've found things that we need to deal with. And instead of taking the time to go back and rebuild those systems from the ground up to meet the new need, we just slap something new on top of it.
I'm not going to argue with any of the observations you've made. I believe they're spot on. But how do we deal with it? I think there's a reality, or at least my perception, I should say, that in state government, you'll never have a systemic change. It's incremental in its approach, and that's the approach we're taking, incremental. And it will get back to the earlier conversation about how we need to prioritize, right? I think you've seen a pivot and a move dealing with a legacy system at DMV. We're going to go to school on it. There are other investments being made. But it's going to be incremental in its approach. I agree the pendulum of reaction or action-reaction is real here. But I'm also, in my gut, thinking the direction we're moving is bringing a discipline that we've never seen before. And if you allow it to play itself out, we'll target where the most vulnerable legacy systems are, where the greatest risk to the enterprise or a specific agency truly is. And that's where we'll target our resource. And that means some things aren't going to get done, right? But that's what a prioritized list really is. And it's that incremental approach. I believe that is the only true direction that we can take this conversation. I suppose I could promise you, oh yeah, in 10 years it's all going to go. Well, that's bullshit, right? It is. But I can tell you we're going to be a little more disciplined here. And people are going to be disappointed because everybody's got a priority, right? Well, someone's got to make a decision. This gets back to, you got to be bold. You got to be fearless and saying, you know what? For the best interest of the agency, here's where we're going to go. I see that attitude playing itself out at the statewide enterprise level. I know I've got bold leaders here in the department. We'll get us there as well. So just hang in there. Like I say, you know, if we're all in it together, you know, it'll make the journey seem a little shorter. But we will be able to look back and say, you know what, we have moved from where we were. And that advancement, you got to advance, right? And you got to adapt. And I believe that disposition is real at the Oregon Department of Transportation. So, appreciate the question. Thank you. Okay? I'm very proud and I am humbled to be your director because I get to work with a caliber of individual that sits in this room. I often say this, and I say it in every forum, and I just don't do it to blow smoke. I think that the men and women of the Oregon Department of Transportation are the best and brightest in state government. You show up every day. You show up to work. We show up to the legislative conversation. We just show up and bring our people. Don't lose that ever. Do not lose that. Engage the conversation. Advance the practice. And I want you to continue to grow both professionally and personally as you wear the Oregon Department of Transportation uniform. Thank you very much for your time. Go out and do good stuff. Thanks, folks. I did.